Ever bought a tool that looked amazing in the product photos, only to find it humming and sputtering the moment you try to use it on a real project? I've been there more times than I'd like to admit, especially with cutting equipment that promises pro-level performance but ends up being a paperweight in a workshop. That's why I'm taking a hard look at the Fusswhip Cut 50Y Pro X plasma cutter before anyone spends hard-earned cash on something that might not live up to the hype. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the biggest promise this machine makes is that you won't need a separate air compressor because it's built right in. For a hobbyist or a small shop owner, that sounds like a huge convenience. No extra hose, no extra outlet, just plug the unit in and you're ready to slice through steel. In practice, that design choice does shave a few minutes off the setup time. When I hooked the cutter up to a sheet of 10mm mild steel for a simple bracket, the compressor kicked in automatically and the arc ignited within a couple of seconds. There was no need to hunt for a compressor that matched the cutter's pressure rating, which is a common stumbling block for beginners. The non-touch arc technology is another headline feature. It means the torch doesn't need to physically contact the metal before the plasma is established, which should translate to smoother starts and less dross on the cut edge. On the test piece I used a 6mm aluminum panel. The torch glided across the surface without the little jumpstart sparks I've seen with older units. The edge was clean enough that I didn't have to sand it down before welding the pieces together, a small but noticeable time saver. Power-wise, the cutter lives up to its powerful cutting ability claim for the thickness range it advertises. I was able to cut cleanly through 12mm stainless steel at a steady 20 amp setting, and the cut line stayed tight without the ragged edges that make a second pass necessary. That said, the machine does have a ceiling. When I pushed it to its maximum 30 amp setting on a 15mm carbon steel plate, the cut slowed noticeably and the plasma started to wobble a bit. It still got through the metal, but the quality dropped enough that I'd have to clean up the seam later. So, if you regularly work with thick plate metal, you might find the cutter's sweet spot a little too low. Reliability is a word that gets tossed around a lot, but in the case of the Cut 50Y Pro X, it's backed by a fairly straightforward design. The inverter circuitry stays cool even after half an hour of continuous use, which is a relief if you're tackling a longer run, say, cutting a series of 1-meter pieces for a custom fence. The built-in compressor does generate a bit of noise, though. It's louder than a standard shop air compressor, so if you're in a residential garage or a shared workshop, you'll want to factor that in. It's not deafening, but the hum is definitely noticeable and can be a nuisance if you're trying to have a conversation while you work. Ease of use is probably where this cutter shines the most for beginners. The control panel is stripped down to the essentials: a power knob, an amperage selector, and a single trigger. There's no need to juggle multiple dials or consult a complicated manual to get a decent cut. I was able to walk a friend who has never touched a plasma cutter through the whole process in under 10 minutes, and she produced a usable cut on her first try. That low learning curve is a genuine advantage if you're buying your first plasma cutter to add to a DIY toolbox. Now, who should actually consider buying this machine? If you're a hobbyist, a small shop owner, or a DIY enthusiast who needs to cut mild steel, aluminum, or thin stainless for projects like automotive brackets, metal art, or custom furniture, the Cut 50Y Pro X hits a sweet spot. The built-in compressor saves you the cost and space of a separate unit, the non-touch arc makes starting cuts less finicky, and the straightforward interface lets you focus on the project rather than the settings. It also fits nicely into a typical residential garage where floor space is at a premium. On the flip side, if your workflow revolves around cutting thick plate metal, think 20mm and above, or if you need the absolute fastest cut speed for high-volume production, you'll probably feel the limitations. The cutter's power ceiling and the slight wobble at the high end mean you'll spend extra time cleaning up cuts, which erodes the productivity advantage. Likewise, if you're operating in a noise-sensitive environment, the built-in compressor's whine could be a deal-breaker, and you might be better off pairing a more silent external compressor with a plasma cutter that doesn't have the air system baked in. A hidden trade-off worth mentioning is the weight. Integrating the compressor adds roughly 5 kilograms to the unit, making it less portable.